It was a crisp evening when I realized I had wandered too far into the thick, shadowy forest. I had stepped away from my campsite to gather firewood, but before I knew it, every tree around me looked identical, and I had no idea which direction I had come from. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, darkness swallowed the forest, and my flashlight flickered weakly, its feeble beam barely cutting through the inky blackness. I was completely alone, my heartbeat pounding loud in my ears. I tried retracing my steps, but every path seemed unfamiliar, twisting and leading me nowhere. Panic started creeping in. I knew I had to stay calm, but the thought of spending the night in the middle of the woods was terrifying. I decided to keep moving, hoping to find something recognizable, a trail, a clearing, anything. As I walked, the sharp snap of a twig behind me sent a jolt of fear through my body. Whipping around, I shone my flashlight toward the sound, but the beam revealed only trees and shadows. "It's just an animal," I muttered, trying to convince myself. Forcing my legs forward, I kept moving, but the uneasy sensation of being watched grew stronger with each step. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, seemed deafening in the silence. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, an indistinct, shadowy figure lurking between the trees. My breath hitched, and I froze in place. I took an uncertain step backward, my pulse hammering in my throat. The figure moved, a slow, deliberate step forward. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a trick of my imagination. Something was there. Someone was there. Fear took hold, and without thinking, I turned and ran. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away. The forest was a labyrinth, its paths indistinguishable in the darkness. Branches clawed at my arms, roots threatened to trip me, but I kept running, lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. Behind me, heavy footsteps followed, steady and relentless. I pushed myself harder, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my muscles begging for relief. But the footsteps didn't stop, they never faltered, never slowed. Then, just as my body threatened to give out, I spotted a faint glow through the trees. A surge of hope flooded me. Light. Civilization. Safety. Forcing myself forward, I broke through the trees and stumbled toward an old, half-hidden cabin. I pounded on the door with all my remaining strength. "Help! Please, someone help me!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing an old man with a lined face and sharp, knowing eyes. Without hesitation, he grabbed my arm and pulled me inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I collapsed onto the wooden floor, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The old man swiftly locked the door, then turned to me with a calm, steady gaze. "What happened? Why are you out here?" he asked. Between panting breaths, I told him everything, the campsite, the eerie presence in the woods, the terrifying chase. He listened intently, nodding as if none of it surprised him. "You did well to find this place," he said at last. "Not many do." He helped me into a chair and handed me a cup of steaming tea. The warmth seeped into my frozen fingers, calming me slightly. The man introduced himself as Henry, an old-timer who had lived in these woods for years. He knew every trail, every danger. "You were lucky tonight," he said gravely. "There are things in these woods that you don't want to meet after dark." A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't want to imagine what might have happened if I hadn't found the cabin. But Henry's presence was reassuring, and he promised to guide me back to my campsite at first light. "You should rest now," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're safe here." Despite my lingering fear, exhaustion took over, and I eventually drifted into sleep, lulled by the crackling fire. For the first time since getting lost, I felt a fragile sense of peace. By morning, the forest looked less menacing in the daylight, but I still stuck close to Henry as he guided me through the trees. He walked with quiet confidence, effortlessly navigating the wilderness. After what felt like hours, we finally reached my campsite. Relief crashed over me in waves. "Thank you, Henry," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Henry gave me a small, knowing smile. "Just be careful next time," he said. "The forest can be a dangerous place, especially at night." I watched as he disappeared into the trees, his presence as mysterious as the woods themselves. Packing up my gear, I made my way home, vowing never to stray too far again. Even now, the memory of that shadowy figure lingers in my mind. The forest is a place of beauty, but also of secrets, of unseen dangers. And one thing is certain, I will never underestimate it again. Before we get into the next story, if you're here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. Next story. I've always been intrigued by the dark web. The stories surrounding it make it seem like a place where anything is possible, no rules, no limits. Dangerous, yet thrilling. I had always wondered what lurked in its depths. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I decided to find out for myself. I sat alone in my dimly lit room, the only source of illumination coming from my computer screen. I had done my research. I knew I needed a special browser to access the dark web, one called Tor. With a mix of nervous excitement and trepidation, I downloaded and installed it. My hands trembled slightly as I opened Tor for the first time. A new search engine appeared, one unlike the ones I was used to. It was called the Hidden Wiki, a directory of links leading into the dark underbelly of the internet. Clicking on it, I was greeted with a list of websites, most with bizarre, meaningless names. Some sites promised illegal services. Others offered items you couldn't buy anywhere else. I knew I had to be careful. I wasn't looking to do anything illegal, I was just curious. Hesitantly, I clicked on a link labeled Dark Net Markets. It led me to a forum where people discussed different black market sites operating in the shadows of the internet. They were discussing everything from drugs and weapons to fake IDs and other illegal activities. It was unsettling to read, yet at the same time, morbidly fascinating. Then, amidst the chaos of links, one caught my eye: Red Room. I had heard the rumors before, live streams where people were tortured or worse, purely for the entertainment of those willing to watch. It sounded like something straight out of a horror film, an urban legend that couldn't possibly be real. But the temptation to prove it false was too strong. Against my better judgment, I clicked the link. A new page loaded, its background pitch black with blood-red text flashing ominously, "Enter at your own risk." My hands trembled, but I couldn't turn back now. I clicked Enter. The screen flickered for a moment, then turned completely black. A video player appeared, and a countdown timer began, 5 minutes. I sat there, staring, my heart pounding. Every part of me screamed to close the browser and forget this ever happened. But another part, the part consumed by curiosity, kept me glued to my seat. I had to see what would happen next. The timer hit 0. The video flickered to life. At first, the screen was engulfed in darkness. Then, dim light illuminated what looked like a basement. The walls were raw concrete, bare and uninviting. In the center of the room sat a chair. A person was tied to it, their head covered by a black bag. A shiver ran down my spine. This couldn't be real. It had to be staged. It had to be fake. Then, another figure emerged from the shadows. Dressed in all black, their face concealed by a featureless mask, they moved toward the bound person. My breath hitched as they gripped the bag and yanked it off. It was a woman. Her eyes were wide with terror, her muffled screams barely escaping past the gag stuffed in her mouth. My stomach twisted. I reached for my mouse, ready to close the browser, but the screen suddenly went black. A new message appeared. You cannot leave now. My pulse spiked. How? How could they know I was trying to exit? The masked figure turned, facing the camera directly. It felt like they were staring right at me. Then, in a voice distorted beyond recognition, they spoke. Welcome, viewer. You wanted to see the dark web. Now, you are part of it. I tried to close the browser again. Nothing happened. I slammed my finger against the power button, desperate to shut the computer off. Nothing. The masked figure continued speaking. You cannot escape. We know who you are. We know where you are. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. Tears blurred my vision. I reached for the computer's power cable, intending to yank it from the wall, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had fused into the socket. A chilling laugh echoed from the speakers. We have control now. You should never have come here. On the screen, the woman in the chair sobbed, shaking with fear. The masked figure stepped closer, now holding a knife. I couldn't watch this. I turned away, but her muffled screams still filled the room. Then, my phone buzzed. I flinched so hard I almost dropped it. With shaking hands, I glanced at the screen. A message. From an unknown number. Watch. Or it gets worse. I nearly vomited. My whole body shook as I tried to think. What do I do? Who do I call? How do I stop this? I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice barely working as I gasped out what was happening. At first, they didn't believe me. I begged them to come, gave them my address, pleaded with them to hurry. Minutes crawled by like hours. The video continued playing. The masked figure didn't act, didn't move. They were waiting. Watching me. Enjoying my terror. Then, sirens. I nearly collapsed from relief. A heavy knock pounded at my door. I ran to open it, sobbing. 2 officers stood there, eyes scanning me with concern. I tried to explain, but my words tumbled out in panicked gasps. They followed me inside, their eyes falling immediately on my computer screen. The live stream was still playing. One of the officers stepped forward, his jaw tightening. We need to take your computer as evidence, he said. We'll do everything we can to track them down. I nodded, too shaken to speak. They unplugged the machine, carried it away. And then I was alone. The silence in my room felt suffocating. I would never forget what I had seen. I wished I had never been so curious. Because that night, I learned something that haunts me to this day. The dark web isn't just stories. It's real. And some doors should never be opened. The sound seemed to be drifting from somewhere deep in the woods, not too far from where I was parked. I sat up, peering through the window, but the darkness outside was thick, swallowing everything beyond the faint glow of the moon. The trees cast long, spindly shadows, shifting ever so slightly in the breeze. A wave of unease crept over me. I had never heard anything like this before. I debated with myself, should I stay put or get the hell out of there? But just as suddenly as it had started, the eerie chanting stopped. Silence. The forest felt unnaturally quiet. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. Maybe it's just some locals doing some kind of weird ritual, I muttered under my breath, trying to rationalize it. I decided to stay. Locking my doors, I lay back down, but sleep didn't come easily. Every rustling leaf, every distant creak of a tree, sent my nerves on edge. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off. I don't know how long I slept before I was jerked awake by a loud knock on my window. My heart slammed against my ribs as I bolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. A face. Peering at me through the glass. Wild eyes. Unkempt hair. A man, standing in the darkness. Panic exploded inside me. A guttural scream ripped from my throat, a sound I didn't even recognize as my own. The man outside stumbled backward, startled by my reaction. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the forest. I fumbled for the car's lights, flipping them on, flooding the clearing with light. Nothing. But the fear didn't leave with him. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright, gripping my keys, my eyes scanning every shadow, every shifting tree. The headlights stayed on, piercing into the darkness, daring anything to step back into the clearing. Every rustle of leaves made my skin prickle. I wished for the dawn to come faster. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first golden light of morning broke through the trees. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. I needed to leave. Now. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life, and without hesitation, I sped away, my mind racing as fast as my car. Who the hell was that man? Why was he out there, in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night? And that chanting? What the hell was that? The questions churned in my head with no answers. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into a small diner, my body still tense, my nerves raw. I needed coffee. And food. And maybe some kind of explanation. The waitress noticed my shaken state almost immediately. "You okay?" she asked, pouring me a cup. I hesitated, then told her everything. As I spoke, her expression darkened. "You're not the first person to say that," she murmured, lowering her voice. "People talk about strange things happening in those woods. They say it's haunted." A chill ran through me. "Haunted?" I repeated, gripping my mug tighter. She nodded. "People have seen figures in the trees, heard strange chanting at night. Some say it's a cult. Others say it's something else. But everyone agrees on one thing: you don't camp alone out there." I barely finished my meal before I got the hell out of that town. I might never know what happened that night. But I do know one thing: I will never, ever camp alone in those woods again. Because sometimes, the wilderness holds secrets that are better left undisturbed. And sometimes, the unknown is better left unknown. Next story. When I wasn't living in New York City, I spent a lot of time traveling by car. That's how I found myself in a little town in Delaware called Milford. I had plans down near Rehoboth Beach, about an hour away. Instead of leaving the next morning, I figured I'd get a head start and drive through the night. It was a 5-hour drive, and by the time I pulled into Milford, it was past 11 p.m. I had only planned to stay for a night, so I booked a cheap motel, just a place to crash before heading out again. The guy renting the place? Sketchy. It took a few back and forth messages to get him to agree to rent it out for the night. He finally told me his father would drop off the key. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Oh, and there are a lot of tropical plants in the kitchen. I can't move them on such short notice." Weird detail, but whatever. I was just looking for a place to sleep. When I finally arrived, I realized just how isolated this place was. The rental sat in a tiny gated community, maybe 15 to 20 houses, max, surrounded by nothing but darkness. I parked, grabbed my duffel bag, backpack, and jacket, then walked up to the door. The lockbox was loud as hell in the eerie quiet. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. You ever walk into a place and instantly feel like you shouldn't be there? Yeah. That. I set my bags down and took a look around. And holy sh*t, he wasn't lying about the plants. The kitchen was overflowing with them. Then I stepped into the first bedroom. Dolls. Everywhere. Old, creepy-ass porcelain dolls, staring blankly from shelves and corners. In the middle of the room, a twin-sized mattress, no bed frame, no sheets, just a bare mattress on the floor. Nope. I backed out of that room real fast. The second bedroom wasn't much better. Nutcracker figures. Hundreds of them. A single, lumpy mattress sat against the wall with one thin sheet. I reached for the light switch, only to realize there was no light. The switch did nothing. That settled it. I was sleeping on the couch. But the unease never faded. I felt watched. Like the house wasn't empty. Hunger finally pushed me out the door. I drove to the only place still open, grabbed some microwave pizza bites and a Snapple, then headed back. Before leaving, I set up my GoPro. Just in case. When I returned, the first thing I did was check my footage. Nothing. Everything was exactly as I left it. Still, the place felt wrong. I tried to shake it off, but as I settled onto the couch, exhaustion finally winning, one last weird thing stood out. The apartment had only one TV. A tiny, old 19-inch screen. And the power cable? Nowhere to be found. This wouldn't have mattered much anyway since I had Sprint, and their service was terrible. But where I was? No service at all. I kept the light on. Yeah, I'm an adult, but having the light on made me feel a little less uneasy in that weird, unsettling place. About an hour later, I couldn't sleep. And, of course, nature called. So, I got up and made my way to the neon yellow, dimly lit bathroom, the kind of lighting that makes everything look vaguely sickly. The shower had no curtain, which was already uncomfortable enough. Now, let me set the stage here. The kitchen had hardwood floors. Not real ones, but that fake wood paneling that screeches horribly when you drag a chair across it. You know the sound, the one that makes your teeth clench. Remember that detail. It's important. So, there I was, sitting on the toilet, reading the back of a shampoo bottle since my phone was charging outside the bathroom, not that it mattered since I had no damn service anyway. And then, I heard it. The unmistakable, grating screech of a chair moving across the floor. Slowly. Like someone was pulling it out to sit down. My stomach dropped. There was someone in the kitchen. My breath froze in my throat. Then, the tapping. Fingertips drumming against the wooden kitchen table. Steady. Rhythmic. Getting faster. I sat there, completely frozen, my mind screaming at me to do something, but my body refusing to move. I whispered to myself, I messed up. I messed up. I messed up. Over and over. The tapping stopped. But I knew, I couldn't stay in that bathroom forever. Whoever was out there already knew I was here. I had two choices, wait and hope for the best, or face whatever was on the other side of that door. I decided on the latter. I rushed out, ready to fight. But there was no one there. The chairs hadn't moved. The table was exactly how I'd left it. The house was empty. I didn't check the rest of the place. I didn't care. I packed up like the place was on fire, threw my bags in my car, and drove an hour away to the nearest Holiday Inn. By the time I got there, it was 3 a.m. The front desk guy took one look at my face and didn't even question it. He let me check in early, even though my room wasn't supposed to be available until the next afternoon. And just like that, I was done with that town. I don't know what happened in that house. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing, I'll never rent some random guy's sketchy-ass $50 place ever again. Next story. I was a solo truck driver at the time, making a delivery in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a hot summer evening, the sun setting over the city, casting a golden glow on the streets. I'd been driving for hours, and my GPS directed me to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Something felt off the moment I pulled in. The building looked abandoned. No workers, no forklifts moving cargo, just silence. The only sound was the occasional creak of wooden crates shifting in the wind. I stepped out of my rig, clipboard in hand, the thick summer air pressing against my skin. A gruff-looking man with a thick beard appeared at the loading dock, signed for the delivery, and I got to work unloading. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the man kept stalling. Paperwork issues, he claimed. Bullsh*T. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, my driving hours were up. I needed to park for my mandatory 10-hour reset. The guy suggested a TA truck stop just across the state line in West Memphis. Fine. Whatever. I climbed back into my rig, exhausted and irritated, and made the short drive. When I got there, the lot was too quiet. By then, the sun had set completely, and the darkness seemed to swallow the entire parking lot. I pulled my rig into a back spot, where the shadows felt even heavier. From the passenger seat, Noodles, my scruffy little terrier, whined. Even he felt it. I grabbed his leash and took him for a quick walk around the lot. That's when I saw him. A man. Standing behind a trailer. Not moving. Not doing anything. Just standing there. Staring. A cold chill slid down my spine. I quickened my pace, dragging Noodles back toward the truck. Once inside, I locked the doors and sat there, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. Hunger finally got the best of me, so I grabbed my dinner bag and headed inside the truck stop restaurant. As I walked, I heard footsteps. I turned, the man from the trailer was following me. Not close. Not running. Just keeping pace. Every time I weaved between parked trucks, he did the same. I pushed open the door to the restaurant, grateful for the warm, well-lit space and the people inside. I slid onto a stool at the counter, ordered a burger and fries, and did my best to shake the nerves. But even as I scanned the room, the man was nowhere to be seen. Halfway through my meal, nature called. I left my plate and went to the restroom. When I came back, something wasn't right. My fork had moved. I'm left-handed. I always place my utensils on the left side of my plate. Now. It was on the right. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. Someone had touched my food. I called the waitress over. "Did you mess with my plate?" I asked, my voice tight. She shook her head. "I've been busy." I called for the manager. Told him everything, the man from the trailer, the following, the fork. His expression darkened. He offered to replace my meal and move me to a different seat. Then he disappeared into the back office. When he returned, his face was grim. And I knew, in that moment, whatever he had just checked on. It wasn't good. The manager's voice was grim as he reviewed the camera feed. "A man did, in fact, approach your plate while you were in the restroom," he said, his expression darkening. "He added something to your mashed potatoes. Stirred it. Then left the building." My stomach twisted. Someone had tried to drug me. I felt the blood drain from my face. The manager offered to call the police. I agreed immediately, gripping the edge of the table, my hands clammy. As I waited, I pushed the tainted plate as far away from me as possible, my mind racing. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived. They took my statement, asked questions, searched the premises, but the mysterious man was nowhere to be found. "We'll keep an eye on the truck stop tonight," one officer assured me. "But I don't want you heading back to your rig alone." The manager nodded. "I'll stay here with you until they can escort you." The gesture, that simple act of kindness, meant everything in that moment. By the time I left, one officer walked me through the dark lot, flashlight in hand, scanning every shadow. When we reached my truck, he told me his partner would be patrolling the lot all night. If that man was still watching, he wouldn't get another chance. I climbed into my rig, locked the doors, and pulled Noodles close. He curled up beside me, sensing my lingering unease. But as I finally drifted into sleep, one chilling thought refused to leave me. Who was that man? And what would have happened if I had taken even one bite? Next story. A few years ago, Belgium. Back in high school, my history class took a trip to Belgium. We were GCSE students, eager for an adventure, ready to make some memories. We just didn't expect those memories to be the kind that haunt you forever. The trip took a turn the moment our bus pulled up to the motel. It looked ancient, peeling paint, ivy creeping up the cracked stone walls. Rundown didn't even begin to cover it. Our teacher, Mr. Thompson, did his best to reassure us. "It's the only place available for miles," he said. "It's just for one night." We had no choice but to file inside. As we checked in, the receptionist handed us the keys, but before we could leave, she said something odd. "Stay out of the basement." A weird request, sure, but we brushed it off. We were too excited to explore the town to dwell on it. Our room? Top floor. Which meant a long climb up a narrow, creaky staircase. The hallway was dimly lit, the lights flickering weakly. Shadows stretched long across the peeling wallpaper, twisting in strange ways. Something about the place felt wrong. Inside, the air was stale and musty. The furniture? Straight out of the 1970s. The curtains? Threadbare, barely keeping out the encroaching night. No one said it aloud, but we all felt the same thing. We weren't alone. That night, as darkness swallowed the world outside, the atmosphere inside the room grew heavier. Thompson tried to lighten the mood. "Let's order some food. Watch a movie." It didn't help. The unease clung to us. Every floorboard creaked like a whisper. Every shift in the curtains felt like a breath. When one of my classmates mentioned needing to use the bathroom, a wave of dread settled over me. The bathroom was small and dingy. Cracked tiles. Flickering light. Something about it made my skin crawl. But nature called, and I had no choice. As I washed my hands, the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. I glanced at the cracked door. No one was there. But the sensation wouldn't leave me. I hurried back to the room, trying to shake the eerie feeling. When I told my classmates, they laughed it off. "Nerves," they said. "Just the creepy motel vibes." I wanted to believe them. But then, the strange thing started. Objects moved on their own. Whispers echoed through the hall. A chill settled in the room, but outside, the air was warm. We tried to explain it away. "It's just an old building. Our minds are playing tricks on us." But then, the scream. A blood-curdling, raw, human scream, echoing through the motel. We shot up in bed. Hearts hammering. We didn't move. Thompson, trying to keep us calm, whispered, "Stay together." His eyes betrayed him. He was just as scared as we were. We debated calling the police, but how do you report a scream when you don't even know where it came from? So, we sat. Silent. Waiting. Listening. The minutes stretched into hours. Eventually, exhaustion won. We drifted into uneasy sleep. The next morning, the motel was eerily quiet. No signs of the night before. No disturbance. No evidence. Nothing. As we packed our bags, a heavy silence settled over us. We didn't talk about it. We didn't want to. But as I stepped onto the bus, I couldn't shake the feeling. As we pulled away, I turned back for one last look at the motel. For a brief second, in one of the darkened windows, I swear I saw something. A face. Watching us leave. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. We left something behind in that motel. Or worse. Something never wanted us to leave at all. The delivery from hell. I do night deliveries for a food service to make extra money, mostly on Fridays and Saturdays when people order the most. One Saturday, around 1 a.m., I got a request to deliver McDonald's to a guy named Jake. His place wasn't far, just 5 to 7 minutes from where I was. I picked up his order, just 2 burgers, from a McDonald's barely 2 minutes away and followed the app's directions. It led me down a tiny dead-end street that connected to another dead end. Jake's house was the last one on the road, sitting isolated next to a patch of trees off a quiet highway. Since it was so late, I didn't want to ring the bell and wake anyone, so I called him instead. No answer. Straight to voicemail. Then, a text popped up. Come to the door. Fine. I walked up his big wooden porch, and when the door opened, a bald guy stood there. But something wasn't right. He wasn't Jake. He was Mark. Or at least, that's what he told me. He looked like he was in his 30s, with a completely bald head, bad breath, and the unmistakable stench of alcohol. Usually, payment is done through the app, so there's no reason for me to wait around for a tip. But Mark insisted I bring the food into his kitchen while he grabbed some cash from the basement. Free money is always good, so I didn't argue. His kitchen was dimly lit, with only a small nightlight glowing in the corner. The air was thick with a strange smell. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about it felt wrong. Mark took his time downstairs, so I wandered into the living room. The smell was even worse here. The TV was on, casting eerie shadows over the room. A half-open door nearby seemed like it had been left that way on purpose, maybe to let the smell out. Something about the whole place made my stomach twist. Just to shake the discomfort, I decided to step out onto his back deck for some fresh air. That's when I heard them. Flies. Buzzing. Loud. Then, a motion-activated light switched on. And I saw them. 2 huge garbage bags, stuffed full of something long. My heart stopped. It took a moment for my brain to catch up. But then it clicked. Bodies. Those were bodies. I needed to get out. Now. I walked back inside, forcing myself to stay calm. Hey, I just need to check something in my car, I called out. Mark's footsteps echoed from the basement. Okay, he responded, his voice slow. As I reached the door, he appeared, holding the cash. But something changed. His eyes flicked to the back door. Then back to me. His smile disappeared. His voice turned sharp. Did you go outside? I shook my head. Nah, just checking my phone in the car. He just stared at me. No blinking. No movement. I pushed open the door and stepped onto the stoop. That's when he grabbed my shoulder. I jerked away and ran to my car. Mark bolted back inside. The front door slammed shut, but didn't lock. I jumped into my car, started the engine, and looked up just in time to see him charging out of the house. With a metal rod. I floored it. The moment I hit the main road, I dialed 911. I told them everything, the house, the bags, the smell, the flies. Within 2 minutes, squad cars swarmed his street. I parked down the block and watched. Mark had been moving the bags. Trying to hide them in the trees. The cops caught him red-handed. It turned out, those weren't just garbage bags. They were body bags. Mark, or whatever his real name was, had already killed. And he had been this close to adding me to the list. Next story. The Motel Nightmare. I used to work the front desk at a motel. It wasn't anything fancy, just a place for weary travelers to rest for a night. Most of the time, the job was easy: check in guests, clean rooms, keep things running smoothly. But one night in London, everything changed. It was chilly outside, the kind of night where the cold sinks into your bones. The lobby was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater. I was flipping through a magazine when he walked in. A strange man with wild eyes and messy hair. Something about him made my skin crawl. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Like he was carrying a darkness inside him. He asked for a room. I hesitated. But business was business, so I handed him a key. As the night dragged on, strange noises echoed from the hall. It sounded like furniture scraping against the floor. I went to check. Silence. Nothing had moved. Then, a knock. It was his room. I hesitated. But something told me I had to answer. I slowly cracked the door open. He was there. Smiling. Not a friendly smile. A manic one. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice unsteady. He didn't answer. He just walked past me, shoving the door open. I followed. And then I saw it. He was tearing the bed apart. Ripping at the sheets. Muttering. His hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. Then, a knock on the door. Jack. My coworker. Big guy. No nonsense. Jack took one look and stepped inside. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice calm. "Why don't you come with me? Let's talk." But the man wasn't interested in talking. He lunged. Fists flying. Jack barely dodged. And suddenly, they were fighting. I froze. The room erupted in chaos. Sheets ripped. Furniture toppled. Jack shoved the man back, hard. And then, security burst in. They dragged the man away, screaming. I stood there, shaking, watching as they carried him off. Turns out, he wasn't just any traveler. He had escaped from a psychiatric hospital. And he had killed before. That night, I realized something chilling. You never know who's walking into your motel. And sometimes, they don't plan on leaving. The motel madness. With a final burst of strength, Jack overpowered the man, pinning him to the ground. "Call the police," he grunted, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't waste a second. My hands trembled as I grabbed the phone and dialed 999, struggling to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens filled the night. The officers burst into the room, moving with swift precision. They subdued the man, wrestling him into handcuffs as he thrashed and screamed, his wild eyes darting around like he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. And just like that, it was over. The rest of the night passed in a blur of statements and paperwork. The police took my account of events, Jack's, and even those of several guests who had heard the commotion. But through it all, a deep unease settled over me, like a weight pressing on my chest. Who was that man? And what had driven him into such a state of madness? I may never get those answers. But I do know one thing. I will never forget that night. If it weren't for Jack, things could have ended very differently. Next story. The woman in the car. It was a cold, dark evening, and I was driving alone down a deserted highway. My job as a delivery driver often took me through isolated roads, but I'd never felt uneasy before. Not until that night. As I cruised down the empty highway, something caught my eye. A car pulling up beside me. I turned my head, and froze. In the passenger seat, a woman sat rigid, her hair pulled into a tight bun, almost like Miss Trunchbull from that old movie. But that wasn't what unsettled me. It was her face. She looked terrified. Wide eyes. Mouth slightly open. Like she had just seen a ghost. Before I could react, the car suddenly veered off at the next exit. I blinked. What the hell? Shaking my head, I tried to push the unease away, but the feeling clung to me like a shadow. And then, it happened again. Half an hour later. Another car pulled up beside me. Different driver. Same woman. Same tight bun. Same frozen, horrified expression. A chill ran through me. What were the chances? I decided to pull over at the next rest stop, to call the authorities, to report the bizarre sightings. But before I could, the car disappeared into the darkness. My heart pounded. Something wasn't right. I kept driving, my senses on high alert. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless. Hours passed. I was nearing London when it happened again. The same car. The same woman. But this time, she was screaming. Mouth open wide, silently begging. Panic clawed at my throat. This was real. I yanked my steering wheel, pulling into a nearby levee. Hands shaking, I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency services. My voice wavered as I told the dispatcher everything. The car. The woman. Her expression of terror. To my relief, the dispatcher responded immediately. You're not the first driver to report this. A shudder ran through me. Others had seen her too. Minutes stretched into eternity as I sat alone, the hum of distant cars the only sound in the night. Then, finally, blue lights in the distance. The officers arrived, their presence reassuring. I told them everything again, every detail burned into my memory. But despite their search, despite combing every stretch of road, they found nothing. No trace of the car. No sign of the woman. It was as if she had never existed. That night, I drove home with a heavy heart, haunted by the memory of her terrified face. I searched the news for days, hoping for answers. There were none. It was as if the entire incident had been erased from reality. But I knew the truth. I had seen something. Something beyond logic, beyond reason. Something not of this world. And though I tried to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had come face to face with the supernatural. From that day on, I avoided deserted highways whenever I could. And no matter how far I drove, she was always there. Burned into my mind. That haunted expression. That desperate, silent scream. A chilling reminder that some things are never meant to be understood.